Kofi Annan was born on April 8, 1938 in Komatsu, Ghana. He studied economics and management in the US, fluent in many languages. He was married twice and has 2 children. In 1976, he became the budget officer for the World Health Organization. From 1974 to 1976, the Director of Tourism in Ghana. In 1980, Head of Personnel in the UN High Commission for Refugees. In 1983, the Director of Administration Management Services of the UN Secretary. In the 1980s, Annan was appointed Assistant Secretary General of the UN in 3 consecutive positions: Human Resource Management and Security Coordinator, Program Planning, Budget and Finance and Controller, and Peacekeeping Operations. Right, on January 1st, he was voted the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations, along with being the first UN Secretary promoted within the UN ranks. In addition, he has served 2 consecutive terms. During this time, he was awarded the 2001 Nobel Peace Prize along with the UN. As a Secretary General, he reformed the UN bureaucracy, worked to combat HIV, especially in Africa, and launched the UN Global Compact. He has been criticized almost as much as he has been praised. After leaving the UN, he founded the Kofi Annan Foundation in 2007 to work on international development. In 2012, he was the UN Arab League Joint Special Representative for Syria to help resolve the ongoing conflict. He left because of the UN's lack of responsibility to resolve the conflict. In September 2016, he was appointed to lead a UN commissioner.
United Nations. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization tasked to promoting international cooperation and to create and maintain international order, a replacement for the ineffective League of Nations. The organization was established on October 24, 1945, right after World War II, with the aim to prevent another such conflict. At its founding, the UN had 51 member states. There are now 193 member states. The headquarters of the UN is in Manhattan, New York City. Further offices are situated in Geneva and Vienna. The organization is financed and assessed and voluntary contribution from its member states. Its objective includes maintaining international peace and security, promoting human rights, fostering societal and maintaining international peace and security, protecting the environment and providing humanitarian aid in cases of famine, natural disaster and armed conflict. The UN is the largest, most familiar, most internationally represented and most powerful intergovernmental organization in the world. Its culture, the UN culture, is supporting an organization that is informed by integrity, accountability, transparency, and respect. The organization culture is the term we use to describe the social norms and rules and behavior that express our beliefs about ourselves and how work is accomplished and how we relate to each other. An ethical organization culture is based on a shared understanding of those ethical values that make our organization what it is today. Every staff is able to recognize, appreciate, and resolve ethical issues that arise in our everyday work. We are able to make decisions based on our shared values and put those values into action.
Kofi Annan. Limitations of role. Changes since 1991 in the international political climate has greatly increased the demands for the services of the Secretary General. Unfortunately for Kofi Annan and the organization he heads, these new responsibilities did not carry well with the additional powers or resources. As a result, it is increasingly important yet increasingly hard for the Secretary General to address the needs of those individuals living in the region of conflict and poverty. 2. UN bankruptcy. When Annan came into office, the UN was near bankruptcy. Annan promised to shrink the UN's operating budget, asking in return that the US pays its $1.6 billion in back dues. He continued cutting UN staff and the budget, but still the United States refused to pay its debt, thereby prolonging the financial crisis and keeping Annan's UN very short of resources. 3. Mismanagement and corruption. Reports surfaced that his son, Kofi Annan, received payments from the Swiss company Kofi Inspection SA, which had won a lucrative contract under the UN Oil for Food program. Kofi Annan called for an investigation to look into the allegation. Annan appointed an independent inquiry committee. In a final report issued on October 27, the committee found insufficient evidence to indict Kofi Annan on any illegal action. 4. UN reform. In an effort to increase the reliability and transparency of the UN, he recommended and implemented a number of reforms. For example, Annan proposed the establishment of a global AIDS and health fund, indebted to the battle against HIV/AIDS and other infectious diseases, to stimulate the increasing international spending needed to help developing countries. National versus individual sovereignty. As a result of the genocide in Rwanda and Srebrenica, based off his appeal, the UN and his states had to reconsider their willingness to prevent conflict and civilian suffering.
Ethical values for Kofi Annan while in office is limited. The reason why is that office holders tend to treat their values as a private matter. From our research, what we have obtained are telltale signs into the value system or key attitudes of Kofi Annan as a leader. One of his values is integrity. He had set up an independent inquiry committee when reports of his son received payments from the Swiss company Contechna for the Oil for Food program. He did not try to cover it up. Another value is compassion. He has done extensive work to address HIV/AIDS by the establishment of a global aid and health fund, in which these funds aided developing countries with the fight against the disease. He is well known for conflict resolution and the development of human rights. His work in these areas was recognized and he received the Nobel Prize in 2001, which he shared with the UN. His first and foremost obligation was to uphold the values of the UN, which he identified with the hegemon of duty. One of his key attitudes, other than formal relationships, is his keen ability to form informal relationships within and outside the organization.
To recap, Mr. Annan's hegemon was one of duty founded on his values of integrity and compassion, as exhibited by his human dignity and drive for peaceful resolution of conflict. The following represent some successes with respect to his values and hegemon that enhanced both the UN and his reputation. The Global Compact. Given that he had a hegemon of duty, when he took office in 1997, he faced the encroaching bankruptcy of the UN. After being denied the $1.6 billion in back dues from the US, Mr. Annan, being undaunted, approached the private sector for support amidst great criticism. This led to the eventual creation of the UN Global Compact, which is involved in developing innovative solutions to address areas such as poverty and inequality, education and peace. The Iraqi War. One of the rules of the Secretary General is to speak and act for peace, even at the risk of disagreeing with member states. Being a man of duty and integrity, Mr. Annan declared that the US-led war on Iraq in 2003 was illegal and not sanctioned by the UN Security Council or in accordance with the UN's founding charter. Given that Mr. Annan was touted for his position by the US especially, it indicated that he was indeed everybody's Secretary General. 2001 Nobel Peace Prize. His compassion and integrity was certainly rewarded when he and the UN received the Nobel Peace Prize for their work for a better organized and more peaceful world. According to the Nobel Prize's website, he was preeminent in bringing new life to the organization, emphasized its obligations with regard to human rights, and brought about more efficient utilization of the UN's modest resources. In an organization that can hardly become more than its members permit, he has made clear that sovereignty cannot be a shield behind which member states conceal their violations. As a person in leadership, it is impossible to escape criticism or failure, and Mr. Annan was no different. In an article entitled Kofi Annan's Legacy of Failure, he was heavily criticized about his time at the UN. These included human rights failures such as the Bosnia and Rwanda genocide. It was said that under him the UN had shamelessly appeased dictators and tyrants and had stood weak-kneed in the face of genocide and ethnic cleansing. There was also a series of peacekeeping abuses. The largest concentration of abuse had taken place in the Congo, the UN's second largest peacekeeping mission. These crimes involved rape and forced prostitution of women and young girls across the country. The alleged perpetrators included UN military and civilian personnel. Then there was also criticism surrounding the Oil for Food program, which did immense damage to the UN's already shaky credibility. It shattered the liberal illusion that they were an arbiter of moral authority in the international sphere. A report on his leadership indicated that his commitment to these ethical values of peaceful resolution and human dignity have created difficulties for Annan. It was argued that the office of the Secretary General itself is endowed with a certain degree of moral authority, but that the personal attributes and values of the incumbent could enhance or diminish this resource. In his case, some observers have argued that he had diminished this resource, if not even squandered it altogether. It stated that his tenure had been tainted from the beginning due to his role in Rwanda and Bosnia genocide, and as a result, those world leaders who later hailed him as moral exemplar at best ignored that history, at worst regarded it as credential. Since he was a compromised figure, they did not have to fear his censure. Though still well regarded as a great humanitarian and leader, Kofi Annan's values certainly influenced how he approached his job. However, their influence on his behavior was joined with and often overshadowed by the political realities of the crises that the UN was asked to address during his tenure.
We are doing our group reflection about Kofi Annan, and to me what I liked about him the most is that not only his job in the UN, but he took it beyond that and created his foundation, which does pretty much the same thing. I find that is a good way of showing his heart towards peace throughout the community and to fight for what is right, for those who cannot fight for what is right. What do you think, Renard?
What I took from this project, Kofi Annan was very efficient in everything that he did. It was reflected when his wife said that he didn't like to touch a piece of paper twice. And I think that attitude is what helped him push along a lot of his ideas and policies going forward.
That's awesome. What do you think, Wayne?
Well, I think that he was a humanitarian in terms of, I think he learned it from school. He said the suffering, the quote is here, the suffering anywhere concerns people everywhere. And in addition to that, because he was so light in the end, he was actually being nominated to be the next president of Ghana.
That was very nice. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, my same thing is about humanitarian, because about same thing with the war and the sovereignty, and think that he fight for the civilians so that civilians will be protected, and his main thing that he cared for everybody, everyone's life was valued.
Oh, that is very good. What about you, Damien?
Well, what I think is that no matter how much good you do, people will always criticize you, as he was heavily criticized, even though he did so much good. But what I admire is that even though he was criticized, he still continued to do good and still continued to stand for what he believed in.
Yes, that is